We're here with Salt Lake City Mayor Erin Mendenhall, who is, can I just say, Mayor, you're doing a wonderful job.
Thanks, Clint. I appreciate that. It's
You're doing a
crazy time.
wonderful job. Salt Lake City is so fortunate to have you. I really do mean that.
Well,
You,
it's early in the midst of a couple of crises, so I appreciate your faith in me so early on.
oh, I have, all the faith in the world in you, Erin. I want to ask, I think the first thing I want to ask you about is this thing that caused, obviously, and rightfully so, a lot of outrage around, just kind of this mass gathering of families welcoming home their missionaries. Of course, how excited would you be that, you're having your son or daughter coming home from the Philippines, having not seen them for long periods of time. But the whole reason why they're coming home is because of COVID-19 and the importance of social distancing, and so that they can come home and be quarantined for 14 days. And so, I think a lot of people were rightfully upset about that, and it could, easily contribute to community spread. And so my question for you is, and you've put out videos, which I would encourage people to go watch, and statements on this issue. But my question for you is, like, how do we prevent that from happening in the future? We had Lieutenant Governor Cox on a town hall yesterday, and he said a lot of that is kind of on the city itself in terms of like the police presence, security protocols, things like that. Is that true? I'm not implying that he lied or anything like that, but like,
No,
what security protocols are being put in place so that that doesn't happen again?
yes, the Salt Lake City International Airport is owned by Salt Lake City, and we are very happy to be the owners and the operators of that airport. And I'm happy to take the responsibility for that as well. I will say that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is absolutely a cooperative partner. They did let the airport know in advance that these wide belly planes would be coming in, when they'd be arriving, and approximately how many people they would be bringing in. They did communicate to the families of those missionaries that they should not come in mass, that they should respect the no mass gatherings of 10 or more guidelines. And I think that they encouraged them to stay in their cars, but no one really did. And I think it's a great example that we see time and time again when it comes to air quality during normal times of life, that voluntary compliance with the best guidelines doesn't necessarily result in compliance. So we got on the phone immediately after those incidents, those series of incidents the other day, and coordinated, which I'm grateful for the continued coordination with the church. And they welcomed the airport, basically bringing security personnel to all of those future events where people will be coming home, to make sure that people stay in their cars. They actually aren't invited to get out of their cars. And that the church has communicated to the families of the returning missionaries that only one car per returning missionary is invited to come and pick that person up, that people are not allowed to get out of their cars. So the airport security personnel will be there to gently remind people of that, and to help liaison connections between the returning missionaries and their families if they need to.
What are you, I'm sure you're seeing, like, in New York City and other cities that we just saw, I believe it was Oklahoma, go on basically complete lockdown, and an issue from the governor saying stay at home. We haven't done that yet in Utah. And as I mentioned, like New York City, which seems to be like the epicenter of all of this right now, has done that. What would you need to see in order to issue a lockdown in Salt Lake City, or even to have the governor, or call on the governor to issue a lockdown statewide? I mean, at what point do you think that's going to be appropriate?
I think it may already be appropriate. And that's with a lot of sobriety that I say that. These are very real consequences to our public health and to our economy. And I know that the governor is and his team are doing their very best to try to balance those two sides of the scale, even though it's much more multifaceted than only two sides. But from what we've seen around the country, and particularly in other parts of the world, it may not actually be possible for us to prevent a serious dip or worse in our economy, no matter what. And so I'm worried that we're waiting for test results to come through to prove the spread of this throughout our communities. And then we'll take actions to close things down when it's essentially too late. Um, my background, as you know, is in environmental health and science, and my studies in school around science and technology. So all of that said, I'm not a social scientist, but the modeling that keeps coming out, and that I believe our county is working on Utah specific modeling right now, is trying to help us inform when do you do that? When do you pull that band-aid off, so to speak? It will hurt. It's already hurting us though. And Salt Lake City we started a survey of the businesses in Salt Lake City about, I guess, 11 or 12 days ago now. It feels like weeks ago. And we've heard from hundreds of businesses, even early on, who were being impacted before any of the restrictions were really put in place. So will there be an economic impact? There already is. Will it be a crisis? Probably to some extent, but is the public health should it be our number one priority? I say yes, it should be. And that's the best thing we can do right now is stay home.
I don't know how this works, Mayor. Can you issue an order for Salt Lake City to go on basically complete lockdown, or does that need to come from the state?
I can, under the emergency declaration authorities that the state grants mayors to be able to act with under these circumstances. But we aren't in a bubble, as you know, Clint.
Hmm.
And Salt Lake City, sort of like Provo City, basically doubles its workday population under normal circumstances. We're the center for culture and the arts in the city. Of course, much of that is closed down right now. And at the same time, I'm hearing from a lot of residents who feel like people aren't respecting social distancing, that they still see people gathering, and they see people clustered in line at the businesses that are open. And so I don't think acting by myself as the capital city mayor is necessarily going to achieve the result that we want it to. So I'm working with our fellow mayors around the Salt Lake County, with, of course, County Mayor Jenny Wilson and the governor in his office, to see how we can do this in a coordinated fashion. But if it isn't going to happen in the coming days or week or so, then that's a tool that's on the table for me.
So, and to be clear, you're saying it might be appropriate to just do this now,
I think it might be.
and
You
it's
might have
interesting.
seen just this afternoon around 3 o'clock, the represent the entity that represents family physicians throughout the state of Utah called on the governor to do just that. They expressed grave concerns for the public for not making this declaration immediately. And I think, you know, if public health is our concern here, then this is something that we need to be looking at.
What do you think about this? It seems like in the past 24 hours, the conversation has changed. A lot of this driven by, who our president is, talking about, at some point the cure may be worse than the virus itself, and we need to get back to work. And after 15 days, we're going to get back to work, and I'll just kind of, I don't even know how any of this would work. You know what I mean? Like, it seems like the best way to get the economy up and going would be to get everybody tested and have a good understanding of where we stand, and work to flatten the curve, and, all of those types of things. But I've been surprised by that conversation over the
Yeah.
past 24 hours, that we should, at some point just be like, all right, no matter what, we got to get back to work. There was even, I think it was like, Lieutenant Governor of Texas said something like grandparents would gladly get this virus if it meant their grandkids had jobs, or something insane like that. I mean, I may have just misquoted that entirely, but what are your thoughts on that? Does that even make any reasonable sense at all?
I personally don't put a lot of stock in what our president says as being sound policy. Um, and it doesn't resonate with me to hear from a person who is in the vulnerable population that we should just basically ignore this thing and not take precautions, and let the chips fall where they may. Um, I care a lot about our people in this community who are over 60 years old. It's about a fifth of Salt Lake City. About 20% of our city is over the age of 55. My parents, my husband's parents, a good deal of our employees at Salt Lake City. I mean, it's ridiculous to say your health doesn't matter to me. And surely there will be fatalities with this virus, but this is what government is supposed to do. It's supposed to look at the threats that are being made on its people, whether they're from an outside source or a virus or something internal. And it has to assess the opportunities that they can create for the public to be as safe as possible while balancing as much as they can the outcomes and the unexpected outcomes that are on the table before us. And we have never dealt with something quite like this in our generation. Now, I know that in the ages of past, that plagues and other health crises have swept the world. We've never dealt with something like this. We've also had a growing population, unlike the world has ever experienced. So our proximity to one another is unique also. And at the same time, our opportunity to do things like this and to work all day for many people from home, even though your coworkers are now 4-year-olds and they may or may not have their clothes on at any given time. Like the world, we've never been here either and faced with this kind of a challenge. So this is what government is meant to do. It's meant to put all of these things on the table, get smart people like the people of Silicon Slopes around the table too, and say, how are we going to solve this? What are we going to do? We've got to work together. We have to be inventive. We have to collaborate. We've got to reshuffle our priorities and then hopefully come up with a strategy that's based on a shared outcome that we agree upon. And for me, as the mayor of Salt Lake City, that number one issue, which I've said since day one, the number one job of any city is to keep its people safe. And I understand that the economy is inextricably linked to public health. Public health is inextricably linked to our economy. But I think what we're seeing right here and the modeling that exists there shows me that we should act sooner than later on flattening that curve and preventing the spread.
Yeah, I don't see how more sickness and more spread is good for the economy, right? And you're talking to the executive director of Silicon Slopes. I obviously care a lot about the economy, but more spread, more sickness. That only hurts the economy. So we got to get this under control. And on that front, are you satisfied with where we're at on testing in Utah? We had the ARUP on a town hall yesterday. Looks like they're going to be able to do 3,000 tests a day, up to 3,000, which
Right.
is unbelievable. That increase in such a short amount of time is just amazing. And I know a lot of people, including in the Silicon Slopes community, are working to bump those numbers up even more. How are you feeling about testing right now?
I think it's been our weakest link so far, but when you're looking at a pandemic that has moved as quickly as this has, I'm not sure that we could have been in a better position. Um, had we known a week earlier or something, but we're doing the best that we can. It is our weakest link. And I think when it comes down to when do you make those decisions about being more stringent with closures and trying to prevent the spread of the disease, it keeps coming back to testing. It keeps coming back to saying, well, when we can show that we have significant community spread of this illness, then we'll act. But we don't have those numbers yet. But at the same time, we're saying we don't have enough testing. People who are showing symptoms are saying, I've been denied from receiving a test. And it becomes very frustrating. And can I just go down that little rabbit hole for a second?
Yes, please do.
I
Please
think
do.
the frustrations around all of this are completely understandable and almost entirely valid. And we saw that with the airport, back to the beginning of our conversation, that a lot of people got really angry that crowds were ignoring the rules and showing up in mass and potentially spreading illness to people whose very objective of coming home was to prevent that. And so I've been asking people as we talk about social distancing to also exercise social grace, that it's under times like these and conditions like this where grace is, you can't have enough of it. And it will, I think, characterize us as a statewide community and is even down to neighborhood communities and families. When we look back on these times and we look back on how we were able to come together or not, and how we were able to assume that the other entity or the other person or the other company had their best interest of the community in mind or hold a grudge. These are the times when we define who we are. And that social grace can go a long way, not only to making it easier to sleep at night, but to have hope that we're going to get through this together and we're going to get through it faster than we would have by letting our frustrations and the emotions guide what we're doing.
Not only have you been dealing with COVID-19, you've also had an earthquake in Salt Lake County, and a lot, really affected Salt Lake City. How are you recovering from that? How is the city recovering from that?
Yeah, I felt one 3.1 at about 3 4 or 5:45 this morning too. So the shakes continue. We're hoping by tomorrow, which is, we had them on Wednesday, and they say for about a week you could feel aftershocks. I've said it before, but I really think we were in the best possible position for the earthquake that we could be. Our emergency operations centers were already activated throughout the state, really, at least at the city, county, and state level. And we were already in regular communications with those entities. We were already teleworking to a large degree as a citywide community, and also a Salt Lake City corporation. So it's kind of strange, when you think about being prepared for a natural disaster, which I'm grateful that the 5.7 wasn't stronger than that. They say that we're still in the queue for a big one, but our residents were also prepared in a lot of ways with kids being home and food in the refrigerators, hopefully, and obviously plenty of toilet paper everywhere.
How can the Silicon Slopes and business community help you in your efforts right now?
Oh my goodness. Thank you for asking. I would direct people to the Salt Lake City Economic Development website, and there's a COVID-19 tab on there. On there is, there's a bunch of links, but right at the top are the links to the Tip Your Server program. And we'll go into that in just one second. But also there's a fund that we've put together as a city, $1 million to start to help small businesses in Salt Lake City. So if you think about the business community in our city, there's 17,000 licensed businesses in Salt Lake City proper. 90% of those are small businesses, and small businesses are the hardest hit. So we're approaching the business side of it with this loan fund. It's extremely low to no interest, 5-year, really flexible terms. And it's available up to $20,000 for businesses with 50 employees or fewer. Now they have to be located in Salt Lake City proper. We released the first $500,000 for applications just earlier this week. And we're the second round of applications for the next 500,000 is available now through April 2nd, I believe, at midnight. That application is on that website. And we would love the support of the community to help these small businesses stay open. I just have to dive down one more little rabbit hole, Clint.
Yes, please do.
We're in a housing crisis, and we're also in an affordable housing crisis. In Salt Lake City, half of the residents here are renters. Half of the people who are renting are spending more than they should on their housing costs, which is 30% of your income. So no matter what you make, you shouldn't be spending more than 30% of that on your mortgage or your rent. But here in Salt Lake City, many people are. And what that means is that when they are faced with a crisis, as we all are under these circumstances, your housing becomes compromised, which means that you could end up homeless. Now, you already know that we're in a pretty tough spot as a statewide community dealing with that and creating enough affordable housing. So it's really important to us as a city that we be able to support our residents and the businesses that they rely on for their employment, to be able to keep them afloat. It's cheaper for us, essentially. If you just boil it down to the economics, it's cheaper for us to help people now than to let them slip into bankruptcy and homelessness and then try to pull them out. So any support that the Silicon Slopes community can give us in directing funds right where they're needed, we're ready to roll with that.
Yeah, I wonder what we can do there on the housing front. I'm glad you brought that up, and I do want to talk about this partnership that you did with Ty Burrell and this fund that you've launched for food and beverage employees. I'm here in a second, called Tip Your Server. But let's talk about housing for a second. What can we do there? And obviously an answer is like, let's spin up some money and start, distributing to folks who can't make these rent payments. But I'm also wondering if there's something the city and state can do, and maybe you've already done, around a moratorium on evictions, and encouraging landlords to take it a little bit easy during this time on collecting payments. Is that being done?
Yes, so that's something we've been interested in, and people, the public, have been asking us about that. In the state of Utah, as in many states across the nation, there is overarching state statute that does two basic things. It prevents cities from putting a rent freeze in place, and it also stipulates how evictions happen and takes that authority away from cities. So no mayor in the state has the ability to put a freeze on evictions or a hold on your rent. That's in the state's hands. But we know that that's in need right now. Unfortunately, that is a federal conversation as well. And you've probably already shared with a lot of your listeners that Fannie and Freddie have placed a moratorium, both for single family homes and for people who are landlords and holding multifamily mortgages in their hand. And so I won't, that's above my pay grade, and I won't try to go into those details, but it's fantastic. And that will help a lot of the households in Salt Lake City and probably across the state. We are encouraging, and we're hearing some good news, but not quite solid yet, from local conversations about landlords deferring or at least granting some time to tenants to who are struggling from this crisis, and probably will be for a few months to come.
Well, let us know if there's a fund or something that we could do jointly with the city on the
Yeah,
housing thing, because yeah, that's something that we haven't actually directed a lot of attention to so far in the Silicon Slopes front. So I'm glad you brought it up.
can I jump in on that? That
Yeah, please.
the CAP program, the Community Action Program, is it's been out there a long time. The city's contributed to it for a number of years, and um, I'll back up to say that I think, particularly in times of crisis, also when there's a lack of public trust, as we've been experiencing with the inland port, it's really important, and it's a great opportunity to use existing tools. Don't invent the wheel here. Go to what already works. And that's been part of my approach in negotiating inland port improvements. But in this situation, I don't want to have the city have to put in the labor to try to invent some new distribution tool when we're already working with a nonprofit partner who does that. And the CAP program is just that.
I
So
love that.
Community Action Program regularly distributes rental assistance to help people and families stay in their homes. And we as a city are going to look at how we could direct some additional funding to the CAP program. And that might be a great tool for Silicon Slopes as well.
I love that. We'll spread that around to our community. What wouldn't you give to only be worried about the inland port right now? Right?
I might have joked that last week made the inland port look easy, but
How are you on food? How's Salt Lake City on food right now?
knock on wood, I think we're good. We just want everyone to order takeout and try to keep our restaurants. And unfortunately, we can't do takeout from bars, or I think a lot of people would be doing that right now. But takeout from restaurants would be good. Our grocery stores are limited, just like everywhere else.
I want to talk about the Tip Your Server campaign, which we've mentioned a little bit here already. We had you and Ty Burrell on a Silicon Slopes town hall, and we were talking about this idea, and you've launched this fund now for food and beverage employees who are losing their jobs. You can go find the details on that at downtownslc.org. I would encourage everyone to do that. How amazing is Ty? He and his wife put $100,000 to get that going. I would encourage all those listening to go to downtownslc.org and help how you can. How's that going? How's the Tip Your Server campaign going so far, do you think?
I think it's going well. We are up to about 150,000 right now, I think. And just for some basics about it, the food and beverage industry in Salt Lake City proper employs about 15,000 individuals. And even under normal circumstances, it's pretty difficult for people living off of that extremely minimum hourly amount, who really live off of tips, to get unemployment or other benefits that other people in other jobs can access more easily. So they are particularly hard hit. They were really the first to lose their employment in this crisis in a widespread way, and they will probably be the last ones back to employment. And with 15,000 employees, you think about the average household size in Utah, and it's really many tens of thousands of people who are impacted by the loss of work there. So we appreciate any donations that your companies or individuals could make to that fund. It is through a foundational arm of the Downtown Alliance, so it's tax deductible. And we're working to make those distributions and start happening through electronic distribution and cutting checks next week.
How are you and your staff holding up?
I'm really lucky. I go to work with friends, and what I mean, you know what I mean. I think you
Yeah.
probably feel that
Oh yeah.
way, Clint. I really love the people I work with, and I enjoy seeing them. So I think we all kind of miss relying on just seeing each other to get through the day, but they are doing amazing work. They're really working around the clock. Ben Collender, who's leading our economic development department, is amazing. His team is just incredible. I'll tell you that they put in over 100 hours just to get this Tip Your Server program up and running. And as of this afternoon, we've packaged everything we kind of learned and all the tools we've created and sent that out for every city and town in the state of Utah through the Utah League of Cities and Towns, in hopes that other cities will pick it up and run with it and save a lot of the effort and labor that we've put into it. So I've got a great team, and it's how I can still wake up every morning feeling excited to get to work for Salt Lake City.
Well, to recap for those listening, I want everybody to visit downtownslc.org, and also we need to check out this community action program and ways we can help on the housing front. We'll send out details on our social media on that. Mayor Mendenhall, I just again, I think Salt Lake City is so lucky to have you. I'm so proud to see you as a leader in this state and everything you're doing. Please keep up the good work. I'm sure we'll hear from you again soon.
Thank you, Clint. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Mayor.